AAUW is me.
I wanted to meet some new people and do some different things. And I also wanted to be part of an organization that had a social commitment to young women and the community at large.
I want to be a contributing member of an organization where women help women in promoting education, in making friends, in entertaining one another, and in sharing ideas about this world.
Women would want to join the AAUW because we have a very fierce commitment to equality and equity for women and girls. And if that's something that you're interested in, this is one of the best venues to help channel that energy.
Hi, welcome to AAUW Connections. Tonight we have a particularly interesting show. Our topic is going to be changing careers after 40, which I'm sure is a topic of interest to many of our viewers. And with us tonight to talk about this subject are Kathy Sherman, who is an attorney with Berliner Cohen, and the Reverend Mary Hudak, who is an Episcopal priest in Orinda, California, at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church. And our hope is that by hearing their stories about how they changed careers after 40, how they sold themselves as older workers, by hearing those stories that we might learn from them and from their experiences. So I think we'll start out just by asking each of you to tell us a little about your experience, how you came to be where you are now. So let's start with Kathy.
Okay, so I have a bachelor's degree in computer science, grew up on the East Coast and moved to California to work in Silicon Valley computer industry. Worked in the computer industry for about 8 years, and at that time I decided I wanted to change careers, but hadn't completed a transition by the time my first child was born. Oh. So I became a full-time mom. And I was home with my kids. I had a second child. When my youngest was 2 years old, I began doing freelance writing so that I could do some work while still being home with my kids.
But you always had that feeling of wanting to work.
I always assumed that I would work. I used to tell people that I was going to hire Mary Poppins when my children were born, and then I found out that that's fiction. So, and in fact, I used to tell the story that I was going to hire the best childcare that money could buy, and then I found out that that was me. So I was home with my kids, and after doing a freelance writing career for about 10 years, I had written a book and I was working on my second book and was really lonely. And I realized that I had decided to write so I could be home with my kids, but they weren't home anymore because they were in school all day. And so that was when the light bulb went off, that this was my opportunity to really figure out what I wanted to be when I grew up and go back to school if necessary. And at that point, I realized that I wanted to be a lawyer and went to law school when my kids were 11 and 14.
And then had a career and now?
I have been a lawyer now for more than 5 years, and I'm a litigator. I do both criminal defense and civil litigation. I feel like it's a career I was born to do. As my sister said to me when I went to law school, why didn't we figure this out 30 years ago?
Now, why law? I'm just curious.
You know, a lot of people have asked me that question, and I've never been able to give a very good answer other than the fact that I just always had the sense, from the time I was 14 years old actually, that I would be comfortable in the courtroom. And back when I was 14, I was afraid of my own shadow. But somehow I could picture myself having a voice in the courtroom.
And so when you were thinking, now is my time, did you think, oh yes, I'll go to law school? Or did you consult with other people? At what moment did you decide, I'm going to law school?
Well, I actually hired a career consultant because I couldn't figure it out. And he had me do a number of exercises, some being very analytical, some being very right brain. And it was during a brainstorming exercise that he said, he asked me the question, if you could change jobs with any 3 people on the planet, who would you change jobs with and why? the first thing that popped into my mind was Chief of Staff of the President of the United States. I quickly moved on to number 2 because that didn't seem practical. Then the next thing that popped into my mind was to be a district attorney, a prosecutor. And it was over right then. The consulting was over because I instantly knew that was right. Not that I'm a prosecutor, but being a litigator in a courtroom was right for me. And then after that, all of my investigation focused on talking to attorneys, all different kinds. I talked to about 20 different attorneys because I wanted to confirm that what they did day to day really seemed like it was a good fit for me.
And then how did you choose a law school?
I applied to a number of law schools. Santa Clara University was one of the schools I applied to because it was close to where I lived. And they offered me a full tuition fellowship,
Oh, my.
which made the decision a no-brainer because that meant I could get out of law school debt-free.
Which is a major consideration,
Yes.
certainly. Now, even after you had decided, okay, I'm going to go to law school, were there any little gnawing fears about, am I doing the right thing? How will my life change? Or did you just say, this is it, I'm doing it, it's just...
Never. I had no second thoughts. I plunged right in. I loved every minute of law school. I've loved almost every minute of practicing law. And like my sister and I discussed, I was born to do this job. My talents and skills just dovetail perfectly.
Perfect. That's really a very uplifting story.
It was a lucky
one that
find.
will give hope, I think, to many people who are at the point in their lives where they're considering a career change. So, Mary, what about you?
So my story is that I was a young woman working for, then it was Arthur Andersen, and I met my husband, and we got married, and we moved to Sydney for 1 year. He was
Australia?
he was a consultant, and we came back to the West Coast, and I had gone to college a couple semesters out of high school, and I just really wasn't mature enough, and I didn't have enough money. I'm the youngest of 8, and so I am the youngest of 8, and so there wasn't any family money for it. And I come from a family in which hard work is really the driving force.
Where are you from?
Detroit.
Okay.
Detroit, Michigan. And so education wasn't the same as it is for a lot of people. And so I met my husband and we got married, and it was the first time that I could go to school without having to work. I had done some night classes as I worked full time. And so at that period in time, we had moved back. We lived in Palo Alto at the time, and I went to Foothill. And I did 2 years at Foothill. And what I really found was I wanted to be a mom. That was my real sort of passion in life, was to be a mother. And I had my first daughter, and that's how Kathy and I met, was through our daughters. And then I had my son. And about the time that I had Casey, I had decided to try and go back to, it was time to finish Foothill and go on to a 4-year school. And at the same time that I found out I was pregnant with him, I had gotten accepted to Cal and decided that it just was time for me to be a mom. So
at that point, had you gone to Cal, what would you have studied?
Econ.
Oh, okay.
Which is crazy. Anybody who knows me would probably just laugh because
I'm laughing.
Were you at Arthur Andersen? Were you an accountant?
No, I was an administrative assistant.
Okay.
So no, but whatever reason, that is what I chose. It was practical, and so I was more in the practical mode. As time went on, I had my third daughter. I'm my third child, who's a little girl, and
All the time a stay-at-home mom.
I was a stay-at-home mom.
Okay.
My husband traveled a lot. He traveled almost 5 days a week for much of the time, and so, but I loved it. I just loved being a mom, and I loved being at home with my kids. It was really fun, and I had a lot of support, I have to say. I did have a lot of support. And I also got more and more involved in my church, and I come from a Catholic background, and my husband comes from the Lutheran background, and so we compromised and we became Episcopalians. And the first Sunday I went into an Episcopal church, I saw a woman who was presiding and celebrating and preaching the service. And it was just an incredible aha moment.
And about what year was that?
It was in 1990.
Okay, so women had major roles in the Episcopal Church.
She was an associate,
Okay.
and women were starting to become rectors, but it was still a few years away. So I saw this woman, and it was an aha moment for me, and I was like, wow, this is how I can do what I've always wanted to do. And so I went and I spoke to some people about it, and this is what I was feeling about becoming a priest. And the timing wasn't right, because I had 2 children at the time. My third wasn't born yet. And a very wise woman, Margaret Irwin, the Reverend Margaret Irwin, said, "Is this all you're going to have?" And I said, "No, I want another child." And she said, "Have your family and then come and revisit this." And that's what she did. And so I said, okay. And so in my head, I had it pretty much mapped out that when my youngest was in first grade, I would go back and finish my undergrad and then go right into my graduate work. And it's pretty much how it happened. Also, for those of you who are Episcopalian, we go through a process, and it's called the process, a discernment process on whether the community calls you as a priest, because it's not a soul call. And so during my undergrad, I went through that call
It's a formal process.
It's a very formal process. And I did it in Minnesota. We lived in Minnesota at the time. And so I went through that process, and at the same time that I did my undergrad, and I finished the process in April, and I got my undergrad degree in May. And the next September, I started my graduate program in Berkeley. We moved from Minnesota to Berkeley so that I could go to seminary.
Oh, you moved here you moved back here for that purpose.
My husband, it's a funny story. I was in the middle of the process. It was coming to the end of it, and it looked like my call would be confirmed. And my husband was in his office on a Friday at about 5:30, and he got a phone call, and someone asked him if he knew someone who would be the president of United Behavioral Health out in San Francisco. And my husband said, "Well, what are you looking for?" And they kind of said what it was, and he said, "Well, that's my resume. Are you looking for me or someone I know?" And they said, "Well, we don't know." And so he went and talked to his boss, and by Sunday evening, the train was down the track, and we were moving to California, and he was going to be the president of this. He was the CIO.
Oh my goodness! And so, but you wanted to come back to go to Berkeley anyway.
Well, and my husband had made it clear to his boss that at some point that would happen.
This just worked.
It
perfect.
flowed. The only problem is that you have to ask permission from your bishop on what school you can go to. And I was geographically located where I should have gone to Seabury Western, and so I had to ask for permission, and it was pretty crazy.
But you did get it.
I
What's
did.
interesting to me is that both of you brought up your children first. Now, agreed, Kathy, you were doing freelance writing at the same time, but you really were, in many senses, stay-at-home moms. You were certainly, and you were too. You were working at the same time.
And my children were first priority. The writing always came second.
And I mean, it's interesting to me that even given that, you both have really done so well in your careers.